What are the biggest challenges that global manufacturers face today?
Many manufacturers have and have had for a while and will have for a while yet is the transition from mass manufacturing to mass customization. If you think about it, we've had a mass manufacturing kind of mindset for over 100 years, ever since Henry Ford. But what they really want to do is get to a point where it's configure to order, where today now you have a self-service configuration platforms that customers can use to go in and select all of the different options and create their own solution. We've tried to handle this within each silo, but really if you want to do this well, you have to think cross-functionally. You need a cross-functional solution to be able to ensure that what is being offered is something that you can also deliver.
I work with a lot of manufacturers myself, more from a data AI strategy perspective.
You brought up AI. One of the conversations we're getting into with this is, there's been a lot of talk about digital threads and as supporting digital twins, but actually increasingly digital threads are seen as supporting AI because people are beginning to realize that if I want to use, let's say, agentic AI in my manufacturing processes, then I need to make sure that the underlying data infrastructure is actually solid and reliable.
Welcome to the Tech Transformed podcast, where we have a weekly conversation with people impacting the enterprise tech landscape. My name is Christina Stathopoulos, and I'll be your host today. After building out an advanced analytics career in big tech, I am now the founder of Dare to Data, on a mission to help individuals and corporations take the next step in their data and AI journey. Today, I'm speaking with Daniel Joseph Barry, the VP of Product Marketing at Configit, and we will be talking about Configuration Lifecycle Management, CLM, a concept not known to many, but I'll tell you, it's one that holds the key to solving some of the most common challenges manufacturers face, especially when they're managing complex products. I recently learned about CLM myself through conversations with Daniel and his team, and suddenly it all clicked. For example, for you to understand what's going on here, have you ever tried to buy a car and found yourself overwhelmed by all of the options, like the engine type, the color, the tech packages, only to learn later that some of the combinations aren't even possible? Or maybe you ordered a product thinking that it was available, only to face delays later or changes because of how it was configured. Behind all of these frustrations is a bigger, often invisible challenge that many manufacturers face when they're managing these complex, customizable products. So I'm excited to dive into this problem and the solution through CLM with Daniel today. So welcome to the show, Daniel. It's great to have you on. Before we dive in, could you introduce yourself? Tell us a little bit about what you and your team do at Configit.
Yeah, so my name is Daniel Joseph Barry. People call me Dan Joe. I'm working here at Configit as the VP of Product Marketing. So I'm part of the marketing team, but working very closely with product management and with sales. So try to understand the market and try to understand the challenges that manufacturers have and then working on the roadmap of how we're going to meet those challenges and then communicating that to the world and to people like you on these podcasts.
Perfect. Well, Dan, Joe, thanks for joining us. So I want to start our conversation today discussing a big problem that manufacturers face. And there's a reason I want to start with the problem. And it's because I worked at Waze previously, and one of the co-founders there, he always says, fall in love with the problem, not the solution, even has a book about it. And I think it's a mindset that can really set you apart in business. So my first question for you is, what are the biggest challenges that global manufacturers face today, especially when we consider the manufacturing of complex products like automotive, medical devices, industrial equipment, etc.?
Yeah, so I guess there's lots of different challenges out there right now that are getting the headlines, geopolitical issues, supply chain things, AI, having a lot of headlines these days. So there's a lot to be grappling with. But the real challenge I think that many manufacturers have and have had for a while and will have for a while yet is the transition from mass manufacturing to mass customization. If you think about it, we've had a mass manufacturing kind of mindset for over 100 years, ever since Henry Ford. So we're often, as manufacturers, organized around those concepts. We have specialization in different departments. You've got your engineering departments looking after design and development, and you've got some manufacturing department looking after the operations and making sure things get made, sales, service, very siloed organizations who within their silos have become very specialized, but then have to adapt to a world where there's increasing needs for customization and personalization, this mass customization market that we're in today. And it's not just for consumers, it's also for business to business. A lot of different manufacturers and their suppliers and the people they're selling to, they want to be able to get solutions that fit exactly their needs. And, as you said, don't fall in love with the solution. There's to fall in love with the problem. There's many, many ways of trying to solve this. And manufacturers have approached this in many different ways over the last number of years. One way is to create lots of product variants. So we know this from the car industry, where you have different car models that are already prepackaged for you. You can, or even whatever it is, appliances in the home or whatever, but that's also in manufacturing as well. You'll make a lot of different variants to try and meet different needs. But of course, you'll never make enough variants to cover all the needs. So the other extreme is to do what's called engineer to order or make to order, where basically you get a specification from the customer and then you engineer a product for them and you make exactly what they're asking. Think of an engine on a cruise ship, for example. So these are often very specialized. So for many years, this was the way that manufacturers are trying to meet customization needs. But what they really want to do is get to a point where it's configure to order, where you offer modules and other things that can be assembled or combined to create the product that the customer needs or the solution the customer needs. And get to a point where today now you have a self-service configuration platforms that customers can use to go in and select all of the different options and create their own solution. And you just gave an example there of automobiles. That's one area where we see a lot of this. We've become quite used to be able to going in, picking the color, the engine, the tire types, all of this. But as you said, the problem is it's very, very difficult to do this in reality. You can offer the options. There's plenty of solutions for creating configurators. One of the most common is configure price quote systems, where you can not only configure it, but they'll handle the pricing and the quotation process as well. But what you find then is you run into a lot of challenges with that and being able to manage that end to end and ensure that what you're offering from a design point of view, the engineering options that you wanted to offer, that they're being observed through the sales process, and that whatever the customer orders then can also be delivered, as you were alluding to there. So we've tried to handle this within each silo, but really, if you want to do this well, you have to think cross-functionally. You need a cross-functional solution to be able to ensure that what is being offered is something that you can also deliver. So I hope that's answered your question.
Yeah, of course. And I was gonna say, you're talking about we've both mentioned it being overwhelming. I think as a customer, it's overwhelming for me when I have so many choices. I think it's called the paradox of choices or something like that. Yeah, like that more is not always better, and it's overwhelming for me as a consumer, but I can't even imagine for manufacturers. And you mentioned as well around customization, personalization. We're really living in this age of hyper personalization.
Yes,
Customers now
indeed.
want highly, highly customized products. All of us do. So, what specific problems arise for manufacturers when they're trying to deliver these unique configurations if their systems aren't built for it?
Well, yeah, and I guess the point is that you have multiple systems in the manufacturing process. Because it's siloed, you will have specific systems for engineering, for CAD systems for 3D design, and application lifecycle management systems for managing the software, product lifecycle management systems for managing the actual bringing it all together in the design process and development process, and then managing the product through the life cycle after that. So lots of systems just in the engineering space. But then if you go beyond that, then you have enterprise resource planning for sourcing and production. You have also used that for commercial terms, commercial rules, etc. You have CRM systems for your customer relationship management, and then the CPQ systems I was talking about before for managing that front end where you're allowing people to configure their products. So there's a lot of different systems in different siloed departments that are very good at what they do, but then the challenge is kind of putting it together. And if you have a simpler product, that's not a problem. It's pretty easy to understand. But when it gets more complex and you offer more options, as you say, it gets exponentially more difficult to do then. So, it doesn't take a lot of options before you get very, very complex. Just to give an example, an SUV, you think how many combinations of features can you have on an SUV? The tire, the engine, the colors, all the software options. How many combinations are there? So we actually did that calculation for a customer who delivers SUVs, and it was 5.8 by 10 to the power of 21. So we're in the grains of sand on the beach, or the number of stars are in the universe kind of numbers. These are the number of valid ways in which you could combine all of these different features that were being offered. So that's the kind of complexity we're looking at. And what you experience then as manufacturers is, well, the reality is that you have some of these heroes on the floor. So there will be experienced employees who have been around long enough, have seen a lot of things, have seen the mistakes, etc. So they know how to interpret information coming from one department into another and being able to translate that into their needs. They'll understand what can be done and what can't be done because of their experience. And they're really the ones who are making sure the operation moves along smoothly. So you usually have this hero-based kind of process where you're really reliant on these people to make things move along and to put out these fires that come up all the time. Because when you have these different systems in different formats in different departments, they all have similar information, but not in the same way. It'll be for whatever they need to do, right? So you really have to interpret it and be able to identify, are there any gaps in this? Is there something they forgot to put in? Are we offering something we shouldn't be offering now? Are we forgetting to offer something that we have available? And you're relying on a manual process. You're relying on actual experts to go in and try to figure this out. But think about it. You're trying to do this for 5.8 by 10 to the 21 different options. This is very, very difficult. So you end up having a lot of problems getting solved in the worst place possible, right in front of the customer. So you were talking about some of the frustration you might have experienced using a car configurator. This is not uncommon. You will find that if you have these systems and data that's not aligned in the back end, there's a high likelihood you'll run into performance problems because it gets very complex. So the actual experience of choosing the product is a bit buggy and there's lots of delays. It's not a nice experience. Or you're not seeing options that you would expect to see. You make one choice and then suddenly you don't have any options left. I mean, it's what's called a dead end. For that combination of things you chose, there isn't a solution. You can't get a product. Or you order something, as you said, then you find out that, I can't actually get that, right? Because now we've offered you something that you can't actually, we can't manufacture. So this actually happens a lot more than you think. And that happens at the coalface with the customer, which is the worst place possible, right? It can also happen at any stage in the process. If you get something that's not aligned in engineering and it goes into manufacturing, then suddenly you have a production stop, right? So you have to stop the production in order to see what is the problem here. And that is very, very costly, right? So you're actually finding these problems in the worst places possible, right in front of the customer or on the production line where you're going to have a production stop. So it becomes very, very obvious. So our appeal is that you need to actually find a different way of solving this problem. You need to be able to have a new approach to this and think sort of cross-functionally. You've got to be able to make sure that everything is aligned, that these, as we call configurations, the configuration options, the models and the bills of materials that you're using, that they're all aligned and synchronized end to end, so you don't run into these problems. And that's exactly what our job is to do. This is what we're focused on, is to try and help manufacturers to manage all of these product configurations, make sure that they're aligned from engineering to sales to manufacturing and all the way into service. So that's exactly what we do at Configit.
Gotcha. And I would hate to think, for these companies that don't have CLM, I would hate to think what happens when that hero on the floor leaves. But
Well,
let's,
that's
I
actually a huge topic in itself. I mean,
yeah.
it is a fact that it's we've got an aging workforce, very
And they've got
experienced
that
people.
institutional knowledge, right?
Yeah,
Up here.
absolutely, yeah.
Yeah.
And it's all that kind of experience, etc. And those guys are retiring soon. And I mean, manufacturers are trying to hire people to replace them, but it's tough. It's very hard to get people to move into the manufacturing space.
Yeah. Yeah.
This has been known for many years, right? So we actually have one customer. It's we're based in Denmark, and Vestas is one of our customers. They're also a Danish company in the wind power industry, and what they build is very complex wind turbines and wind farms. And when we helped them, the issue was that they had a few experts that knew how to configure the 160,000 options that you could do when you're configuring a wind turbine and a wind farm, right? So there's a lot of things to take into account when you're doing this operation. There was 160,000 things that needed to be set. So Vestas realized that, it's kind of risky that we're relying on these few guys who know how to do this. I mean, if anything happens to them, like we're in deep trouble. So they said we need to automate this, and that's where they used our solutions to be able to do that, and adopted what we would call a configuration lifecycle management approach, which basically was to capture all of that knowledge that these guys had in a product model and in rules that we could share centrally. So we created this centralized product model that became a shared source of truth on what's possible and what's not possible. Made sure that we had all of the technical rules and information from their PLM system, which in this case was PDC Windchill, and then all of the operational and commercial rules from their SAP system that they had there, bring that together and form what they called a workbench. So then they could work on these configurations and test them and validate them before they were offered. And it just completely automated their process and took away the reliance on some of these key individuals. So they were actually able to handle 90%. They handled the same amount of product variants and projects, but with 90% fewer resources. And they added a sales configuration on that then, where they actually brought the time for configuring a solution from 60 minutes down to 5. So there's some real benefits that can be achieved by kind of adopting this approach.
Okay. I want to get into a little bit more about CLM and understand this approach, but I want to circle back first. And because you've mentioned about the importance of aligning all of these different teams between sales, manufacturing, engineering, etc. So can you give us an example of how sales promises don't align with what engineering or manufacturing can actually deliver, and what problems that ends up causing down the line? You've already hinted into it, but I'd love to have a little bit more of a precise example of what exactly happens in these situations.
Yeah, I think it could be helpful. I mean, I don't know to what extent our audience probably has different experiences in this area. So maybe just to walk through what normally happens in these situations, right? So, I mean, if we start at the engineering side, as I mentioned, there's lots of different engineering systems, but you try to pull everything together into your PLM system. So you'll have your engineering product models and engineering BOMs defined there. And what you're really capturing there is your engineering intent, where you want to actually define these are the technical options that are available, right? So are we going to offer 110 volts and 220 volts on the electrical side, stuff like that, right? Some of these may never be exposed to the customer, but they're important to have in there, right? Now that then gets handed over to sales, for example, right? So now you're going to try and sell this design, this idea that you have. And that's going to be through a product configurator. That's going to be in maybe a CPQ front end, something like that, based on customer information in your CRM, commercial pricing and costing, and manufacturing bills of materials in your ERP. And then you're going to try and offer that there. But the key question becomes, well, how do you ensure that what's being exposed in that product configurator in the front, in the CPQ, for example, how do you ensure that's actually aligned with what the engineering was telling you? Because now you have to interpret that engineering product model, the engineering bill of materials, and what that's offering, and then kind of understand that in the context of the operational and the commercial rules that you have for your ERP, and maybe the marketing rules that you define maybe in your CRM or in other places, and try and bring all that together. So what happens then is you're trying to do all this, and you're trying to do it in the terms of a synchronization with BOMs, for example. So you're trying to convert an engineering BOM into a manufacturing BOM or into a sales BOM. You're trying to make sure that these are all aligned. They've all got slightly different information in them. So when you get to the product configurator, you'll find then that maybe there's options that just never get delivered there because it was in the engineering BOM. It's a possibility you can offer. It's an option that's there, but because it wasn't defined in the same way in the manufacturing BOM or in the sales BOM, then it's not there, right? So then you can't actually offer it there. Or you're not aligned in the sense that there's been a change to the engineering product model or the engineering BOM, and now that's not being exposed in the configurator, right? So suddenly now an option that's being taken away isn't still appearing in your sales configurator because these things aren't aligned. They're coming from different systems and being manually aligned there. So that causes a lot of problems. The sheer complexity of these product models as well, it should be added, is a big challenge just for the product configurators themselves. When these become very, very large, what happens is that you have these configuration price quote systems who are trying to interpret in real time what is possible based on the selection that you made. That's the algorithms that they use. They're called the constraint solving algorithms. So basically, they're trying to figure out, every time you make a choice, they're trying to take away options and try to figure out, now, what can I offer you now? So they're doing a lot of runtime calculation. And when you get really complex models, what happens is that you can get large delays after every time you make a selection. So it can often take maybe 2 minutes. The worst case I've heard is 10 minutes, that when you make a selection, you got to wait before you can make the next selection. And this obviously becomes very tedious. So one of the areas where we're getting involved is this performance problem that you find that is just very, very slow, right? But the other problem is then, can you trust what you're being presented? Is this actually something that I can actually order? And whenever you make a selection using an algorithm like this, you can make selections and then suddenly it says, well, I've got nothing more to offer you. So you've come to a dead end. And it's like, okay, now I can't actually choose anything. What do I do now? Then you got to go backwards, right? Or there's a conflict between, it's like, I'd like to offer you this, but there's too many things that are conflicting. I don't know how to solve it. Then you got to backtrack and sort of do it again. So these are the type of things that really annoy customers when they're trying to order something, or even your own direct sales staff or your partners, where they're seeing these performance problems, they're seeing delays, they're seeing these errors that are coming in. And as I said before, like that's one area you're seeing the problems. The next area is when it gets into order handling and manufacturing, and they're like, well, we can't make this because it's offering something that's not part of the new version, or we took that option away and now we don't have the inventory for it, or what have you. So it gets quite complicated. So the approach that we're taking instead is to actually focus on those product configuration options and bring them together into this shared product model that everyone gets access to and everyone can contribute to. And then in using our virtual tabulation technology, we actually pre-compute all of the different options that are available. So that 5.8 by 10 to the 21 valid configurations, we'll actually compute all of those beforehand and get a full overview of what's being offered. And that way we can make sure that the compilation process won't work unless all of those things are valid. If there's any rule conflicts or there's any gaps or inconsistencies or misalignments, it won't compile. And it will give you a lot of information back to say, this is where we're facing problems. This is where you've got conflicts. You need to change this rule and this rule in order to make this work. But once you've done that, then you've got it's based on symbolic AI technology. So we're able to tokenize all this and make it into a very compact file. And basically in that file now, you've got a full overview of everything that's possible. And you can put that into a product configurator and provide access to an API to this file. And you can basically just do a lookup. So instead of having to do runtime calculation of what's possible and what's not possible, now it's just a lookup and say, is this combination valid? And it's like, yeah, it's valid. You can keep going. And that way you've always got a valid solution. It's up to date. It's a lookup, so it's lightning fast. So the sales experience becomes much, much better, right? You don't run into the same problems that you did before. And it's all based on aligning that data that you get from the engineering side, from your ERP and your other systems, and bringing it all together and validating it before it gets presented to the customer. Maybe
Gotcha.
I've jumped a little bit further along here, but yeah, hopefully that
No, this is fascinating. So from what I understand, the way that they were managing that this has been managed without CLM is you have like the heroes on the floor, you have these algorithms that will calculate it in real time, but that has a delay, right? And so, or it's a processing time, and
Yes,
it can be delayed up to 10 minutes, like the example that you said. You can
yeah,
come up to dead ends as well, right?
yeah, exactly.
So your approach is actually calculating everything in advance.
Yep.
It's really all there. You don't have this delay and waiting. Is there anything else behind this approach? You've already given, I think, a good explanation, but anything else we need to know about this CLM approach and what Configit is offering?
So, well, basically, it's a cross-functional way of looking at things, right? So this is often where it gets a little bit confusing for people because we're so used to the siloed way of looking at things, right? We have an engineering silo, we have a manufacturing silo, a sales silo, we have our processes, systems, language, all of formats that are all specific to that area. So we're very used to that. So when you get something that comes along and cuts across those domains, it can be very difficult to position it in your mind. I think if you needed to try and position this in some way that makes sense, you could think of it as an extension of PLM. In many ways, I think actually it really makes PLM, right? We have a lot of PLM systems out there, but a lot of people have implemented them like product data management systems where it's somewhere where they keep their parts, they manage their parts and their bills of materials, but they're not really thinking in a product lifecycle management way of doing it. So if you're really true to the product lifecycle management approach, you're really managing that product and the versions of that product that you have all the way through the lifecycle, all the way through to servicing that product in the field over many generations. Because for many of our customers, their solutions in the field for decades, right? So service is a huge part of this, and it's often overlooked in discussions. So in PLM, you're thinking about product lifecycle management. In configuration lifecycle management, as the name implies, you're really focused on the product configurations. Because if you think about it, in a hyper personalization world or hyper customized world, people aren't buying products anymore. They're buying a configuration of the product, right? And I think most people would like that, right? I mean, how many times have you been annoyed getting a user manual for something you just bought and it covers like 5 or 10 different products with things, it's got options in there that you don't have in your product, and it's very confusing. You'd like something that's just for what you bought, right? So really, we're all about managing the configurations and managing them through the configuration lifecycle, right? So, and the first step is in consolidating all of that product configuration information in product models, in BOMs, bills of materials, or even Excel sheets. We have a lot of customers who define their configurable rules and other options in Excel sheets, and we import that and kind of put it into the mix and bring it all together from the different parts of the organization, and then validate and make sure everything is working and that you're not offering something you shouldn't, with a product model that's shared, right? So it's an extension of PLM in that regard, that we are actually managing now the life cycle of the configurations as well as the life cycle of the product that's being done in PLM. But we integrate very well into the ERP world, where we're getting the pricing and all the commercial information from, and to them with these downstream systems, because we've got it's an open solution. It's SaaS. It's a SaaS offering. So we've got open REST APIs, so it's easy to integrate with. So we can really, when we have the product models available and they're all validated, etc., we just have a single API that any system can go in and use that then, whether it be engineering configuration or manufacturing configuration or sales configuration. They can do all of that. But there's two other aspects of this I think I'd like to point out. So what I've been talking about right now is just establishing the product models and being able to offer that to customers and allowing them to buy it, right? But there's a life after that. There's a life cycle, right? So the first area then is how we support digital threads. So whenever somebody's making a configuration, whether it's for engineering, manufacturing, or sales, we can save that configuration and add metadata to it with versioning and all of this. So now we start to keep a record of the configuration and how it evolves across the different phases of its life cycle. So let's imagine somebody makes a configuration for a product and they buy that. So then we have an as sold configuration that we can save centrally with metadata about that. Then when we're going to the order handling part, we're going to retrieve that configuration and say, okay, that's the configuration the customer ordered. We're going to manufacture that, and we're going to save a new configuration now of our as delivered, because that may contain extra information about the specific vendors that you use, the specific type of hinges or screws or whatever it is you think is important, to add to that configuration, some choices that you need to make for manufacturing. So that's your as delivered configuration then. So when it gets to your servicing, upgrading, maintenance, all of this of products, which again, often are in the field for many years, it's great to be able to retrieve those two configurations, the as sold and as delivered, when you're trying to service it, because that allows you then to sort of pre-plan your service event. You can go out there and say, okay, let's bring up what we actually delivered to these guys. And then you can validate you can validate what they've got, based on the configuration they have, and say, is this still valid, right? Is this still a valid configuration? And if I need to upgrade it, what pieces do I need to upgrade it with, right? And we have services we offer, like, because we have the full overview, we can tell you the minimum number of changes that you need to make in order to make something valid. So there's a lot of tools we can offer in this place. So you can pre-plan your service event without, before you even get there. So that typically reduces service events from weeks to days, right? Or even hours. So there's a lot of advantages to this. And this as delivered, as sold, as service kind of a chain of configurations, that formed a digital configuration thread. So now you've got a thread, so you can have full traceability of what's happened to a particular configuration sold to a customer over time. And you can link that back to the product model that you used, a version of that. So now we're actually able to support that bigger digital thread or configuration management, where you're trying to manage changes to products over time. So we can play into all of that. So that's one other aspect I think is really important. That's very important to manufacturers and makes a lot of things work throughout the life cycle of the product. The final thing I'd like to talk about is the fact that now that you've got this full overview of all the things that you can offer, thanks to the virtual tabulation compilation we did, that's solution space, as we call it, that's available to you now for analysis. So you can actually, we offer some analysis tools where you can go in and look at, okay, this is what I'm offering with this product model. If you make a new version of your product model, you can compare the two solution spaces and see what's the difference, what got added, what got taken away. Because you might make a single rule change, thinking is going to take away one specific thing, but that rule change could have consequences that you didn't intend. So now there's a bunch of other things you can't choose either, right? And this is a common problem, right? You think a small change won't make a big difference, but suddenly there's a lot of things that don't work anymore. So we have these solution space analysis tools, so you can look at that. But you can also, and you can explore your things, say, for different feature combinations and say, why is it I'm not able to offer this? Or how many times am I offering this option in the different variants that I have? And then finally, you can actually compare what am I offering to what am I actually selling. So you can start to identify what low runners, like options that you hardly ever sell, or high runners, like these are options I always sell. So that gives you a chance to optimize your portfolio. So on the one hand, if I'm always selling it, then maybe it should be standard. Maybe it should not an option. If I'm hardly ever selling it, should I be offering this option at all? Right? Because I got to keep inventory for this thing and stuff like that. So there's a lot of ways you can work with this information that we have available now to the product model, the actual compiled product model, which is now our solution space. So you can do a lot of analysis on that and actually optimize your product portfolio as well. So there's a number of benefits in trying to adopt this kind of approach to the way you manage what you're offering to customers.
Yeah, I like these points that you added on. They're important. And I work with a lot of manufacturers myself, more from a data AI strategy perspective. And I've learned a lot in our conversation because now I can take this and go tell them all about it. I love everything you've explained. And
Yeah.
we've gotten
On
to
that
the
point,
end.
actually, not to not to jump in, but I think it's really
Don't worry.
important because you brought up AI and stuff like that. And one of the conversations we're getting into with this is, there's been a lot of talk about digital threads and
Mhm.
as supporting digital twins, but actually increasingly digital threads are seen as supporting AI because people are beginning to realize that if I want to use, let's say, agentic AI in my manufacturing processes, then I need to make sure that the underlying data infrastructure is actually solid and reliable.
Of course.
So our solution is focused on product configurations, but it's a type of cross-functional solution that you're going to need more and more in manufacturing because you need to be able to, for different purposes, connect the data in different systems together. So we're supporting a digital configuration thread. There's other types of threads that you would like to have as well. So you will see a number of different threads for different purposes, but the thinking has got to be cross-functional. It's got to go across these systems. So I think that's going to be a big part. I think AI is going to drive a lot of that thinking now, and digital threads. So it's very important to try and think this through, and to try and understand these new ways of looking at these problems.
Yeah, that's a good point. And we've come to the end of the episode, unfortunately. I'd love to keep chatting and learning more about this. But to wrap up, if you could summarize one quick takeaway for CIOs, CEOs, other IT decision makers, manufacturers, what would it be and why?
Well, the bottom line for me is it's time for a new approach. We've been
Mhm.
trying to solve these problems in different ways for a long, long time. It's time for a new approach and a new way of thinking, a cross-functional way of thinking. I think that's mainly my main point, which ties into not only this issue of going from mass manufacturing to mass customization, but a lot of the new challenges we have around digital threads, twins, AI, and I think if you don't try to really embrace this and try to figure out how to be successful with this, you could find yourself, being left behind, going forward. So I would encourage people to start thinking in this way and start to think about these kind of solutions.
Perfect. Well, everybody, you heard it from Daniel himself. We need to embrace this. Thank you so much, Daniel, or Dan Joe, as you go by, for joining us today. I appreciate you coming on. Also, to everybody who has been listening, thank you. We hope you took a lot away from today's podcast. And for further information on what we've talked about, please head over to configit.com, CONFIGIT.com. We'll be back next week with another episode in our podcast series. Until then, make sure you subscribe to this podcast on all major platforms and follow the conversation on our socials at EM360 Tech on X and LinkedIn. And for more great daily content, head on over to em360tech.com.